Chapter 2. Ripples. Karen Missy watched in horror as New York City burned. Buildings toppled, dust, ash, and fire filled the air. Everywhere citizens ran in terror, fleeing from the macabre creatures that chased them. Death and chaos surrounded her. A wretched mixture of burning odors choked her, and covering her face with her hands did nothing to abate the onslaught of her senses. A male raccoon, clad in all the trappings of a well-to-do businessman, was screaming as he tried to escape some grotesque creature that lurched after him with a speed it did not look capable of. The creature, all knotted bare flesh and muscle with skin, pulled back over an eyeless, flat, and elongated monkey skull, sporting a massive lobster-like right arm and bulbous octopus-tentacled left arm. Its legs were a horror-inducing amalgamation between a spider and a crab, so thin and sharp as if to look brittle beneath the tons of bloated flesh they bore, but with a shell-like sheen and barbs that resembled the hairs from a spider as they did the barbs on a crab. It didn't skitter like one might think it would. Instead, it carried itself by way of a gated, destructive, lunging gallop. It leaped forward, landing and slamming into the side of a building or lurching forward to drag its engorged stomach over the ground, then righted itself in some form of a drunken stumble, then went into a series of 3 or 4 quick gallops before lunging forward again. The businessman tried to lose the creature in the maze of abandoned vehicles in the street. The demon, what else could it have been, made a quick, chaotic turn, tossing up chunks of cement before finding traction and charging after its victim. Cars crunched and groaned as they were shunted aside by the demon's mass, or tossed into the air by the thing, not hindering its speed at all. Its clawed arm lashed out, one of the tentacles wrapping about the raccoon's legs like a mucus-covered whip. The raccoon fell, its head cracking against the asphalt. Karen's warning shout was drowned out by a deep, bellowing roar as the demon lifted its lobster claw of an arm and brought it down upon its victim with such force that the raccoon became little more than chunks in a puddle in the crater the claw had left in the street. The raccoon may not have heard Karen's shriek, but the demon had. As its claw arm lifted with flesh and organs dripping and plopping free, the demon's head turned to glare directly at the goat, its empty eye sockets somehow boring into her with a hunger that was almost palpable. Fear gripped Karen's heart and held it like a vice, squeezing until it seemed ready to burst. With another deafening roar, the demon charged. Karen froze in place, the pit of her stomach in knots and ice running through her veins as the demon thundered toward her. It raised its giant claw, bloody remains flying away, and as it brought the claw down in a strike that would turn Karen into another puddle of gore in the pavement. She closed her eyes tight, hoping there would be no pain. She gasped in the cold, chilling air of her scrying chamber within the New York City Astral Warding Center. Her brown eyes opened as if in a panic, and she fell forward from her meditation pose, heaving as if she were ready to vomit. Her sandy blonde hair spilled forward, hooking over her small horns, and soaked with sweat, along with her pale white and brown splotched fur. Her loose blue and violet garments of the Arcane Ward Center were having trouble staying dry, even with the nano-weaving actively removing the moisture. The scrying chamber's sigils faded as she left her trance, and the light slowly brightened to reveal the smooth, soft gray dome of her chamber. Her cushion hummed for a few moments as the sweat that had gathered in it while Karen was in her trance was dried away. Behind her, the door to her chamber sighed open, then closed. Karen was still heaving as the nurse approached her. "Ms. Missy, are you all right? Your vitals were showing some pretty distressing numbers while you were in trance." The nurse didn't bother touching her to read her vitals. They were fed directly to her overlay display from Karen's medical suit of implants. Her heart rate was up, and her temperature was above normal for the low setting the scrying chambers were kept at, but she was slowly improving. Shaking her head, Karen swallowed and took a few more moments to catch her breath. She sat up and pulled her hair back, tying it into a loose ponytail before looking at the nurse. "I'm fine. Just a case of TS is all." Trance-induced shock was a catch-all term for the extreme emotional state scryers could reach during their sessions. What they viewed was, or would be, real in some form or another. Occasionally a scryer could enter a viewing that put out such raw emotion that they came to believe they were actually where they were viewing. It happened to everyone in the field at some time or another. The nurse offered Karen a glass of water, likely laced with Nuris, nanomachines that were programmed to move through the blood to reach a person's BTEX and transmit a signal to release certain brain chemicals in order to calm them down. Carrie accepted the glass and swallowed it quickly, then stood and handed the glass back. "I need to make my report," the still nervous goat said. "Your session is already under review, ma'am," the nurse replied as she looked over Karen's vitals and watched as they dropped, the Nuris quickly doing their job. Karen was already shaking her head to the comment, "They can review it all they like, but what I saw was just..." She paused as the door sighed open again. The hallway outside her chamber was a madhouse. Nurses were scrambling to get to other chambers. Scryers were being hauled away on stretchers or sitting on the floor against the walls, suffering from ailments ranging from nausea and headaches to uncontrolled weeping, terror, or all-out hysteria. What the hell is going on here? Karen! Stephen, a short, chubby owl who happened to be Karen's manager, called out. Karen, are you all right? We're getting major TIS incidents and no recorded sessions. Thank goodness you're all right. So far, you're the only one who's come out of their trance in good enough shape to walk. A bolt of fear ran down Karen's spine. She'd thought she'd had it bad with her shock and dry heaving. To think that she was the lucky one was incomprehensible. She hugged herself and rubbed her arms to keep the chilling thought at bay. Wait, none of the sessions were recorded? How can that be? Stephen's sagging shoulders rolled in a shrug. We have no idea. Protocols are being put into place, and we're bringing in a team to consider the data. He placed a nubby, talon-tipped hand on her arm. Look, I want you there. You're the only scryer we have right now that isn't having some sort of breakdown. Tell them what you saw and try to help them as best you can. Karen looked around at her fellow scryers. A good number of them were her friends. Every one of them was either screaming, weeping, or curled up trying to console themselves while the medical staff saw to those who were suffering from heart attacks, seizures, or hemorrhages. Medicine had come a long way with the advent of medical nanotechnology. Most diseases had been wiped from the earth. Simple things like the cold could be fixed with a nasal spray of nanosine, nanomachines that worked similar to Nuris mixed with a chemical medicine for faster results, that told your body how to rid itself of offending viruses, bringing the accompanying chemicals directly to the source of the problem. Sudden trauma, like a heart attack, could be resolved quickly with a mixture of nanosine and a physician's care. Some of these people were suffering from things like a mental collapse, which was something only deep psionics and long-term therapy could fix. Counting herself lucky, she nodded to Stephen. All right, pass me the locations. She held out her hand and Stephen took it. Beneath the fur and feathers and skin, ingrown circuits passed mentally coded information from Stephen to Karen. Almost everyone had Beck BTech or biotech implants these days. The process started when a person was young, though anyone of any age could get them. A simple injection of coded nanomachines, vitamins and minerals were injected into a person. The machines would move to the brain, connecting to specific points and using the vitamins and minerals to start replicating and growing to create a computer inside a person's mind that interacted directly with the brain. After a period of 2 weeks, the machines would build a series of circuits and pathways from the hands and eyes to the brain. Other pathways to other regions of the body can also be created, though they weren't standard and were usually adult in nature. The circuits in the hands allowed for a person to pass along stored information to another person simply by touching hands and sending the right mental code, which could be anything from numbers, passwords, images thought of in sequential order, or combination of the three. The connections to the eyes allowed for perfect vision by correcting the shape of the eye and create visual overlays. In addition to normal vision, a person could stream videos through wireless connections, overlay maps or distances, and the majority of advertisements or signs these days would interact with a person's Becks to display sales, offers, etc. as a person looked at them. With all the additional information being fed to a person through electronics, Becks allowed for perfect memory, storing every sight, sound, and detail for complete recollection at any given date. A person's situational awareness was near perfect so far as general knowledge of their surroundings went. Karen took a breath as the information was passed to her, and her implants accessed the data and fed it to her in the span of thought. The meeting would be taking place in a boardroom several floors up. She had an access code and a list of other attendees as well as dossiers of their backgrounds, experience, and who they were representing. Most were politicians, city council representatives, lawyers, AI proxies. Everyone you didn't need at a meeting to figure out what was wrong with scryers all going insane at almost the exact same time, but a perfect cast to figure out how to best use a situation like this to move their careers ahead by pandering their expertise to the media. Scanning further down the list, she found doctors, psychiatrists, some notable sorcerers and psionics from city-retained firms, as well as an EDF representative and his aide. I'll be there, Steve. I don't think I'll be of much use, though, she admitted. After all, what could she lend to a meeting of so many professionals other than to say that she had a vision of one of the largest cities on or off Earth with a cutting-edge warding system and runic barriers, was under siege by the largest host of Outworlders since the initial invasion? Steve gave her a pat on the shoulder to boost her confidence, though his face showed worry over the cause of so much astral feedback and the sudden barrage of TIS cases. Just do your best and be careful. I will. She tried giving Stephen a reassuring smile, but was fairly sure it had come across just as worried as his own. Stephen nodded once, then moved to a nurse, checking to see if there was anything he could do while Karen began wading through the chaos that was now her workplace. If she was going to a meeting with so many people, she wanted to be sure to have a decent seat. After all, a meeting with so many opinionated people was bound to grow lengthy, long-winded, and loud as cautionary politicians and proactive health and safety officials butted heads. This was one of the reasons she had slowed her climb up the proverbial ladder. She preferred doing her work to sitting in meetings, real or digital, all day long. She didn't know how Stephen could stand it, and he was only in the supervisory position above hers. The rest of the building was as packed and chaotic as the floor she worked on had been. People were running and shouting, bumping into one another and clamoring to find out just what had happened. Messages, mostly things she was CC'd on as part of the general AWC branch, as well as some additional information being passed to everyone who was going to be at the meeting, were filling her in on the situation. The AWC's scryers hadn't been the only ones hit with the sudden influx of traumatizing TIS cases. Reports were flooding in from all over the city and even bordering states. Sorcerers and psionics that had been actively scrying within the last half hour were being hospitalized because of some sort of astral or arcane feedback from their visions. There were few incidents of a scryer being cognizant or up and about after the event. Perhaps 1 in 100 were able to function without medical attention. Had she been that lucky? The thought chilled her. What could have happened to cause so much agony to so many in such a small time frame? Whatever the case may be, she knew that she'd need to look presentable for the meeting. The last thing she needed now was to look like a disheveled survivor of some natural disaster. A quick stop by her locker would be called for. She turned a corner to begin making her way to the locker room and froze. A few meters down the hall stood the raccoon from her vision, dressed in the same manner as she had seen him before and speaking briskly with a hare as he entered the elevator. As the elevator doors closed, so did Karen's hopes that everything would turn out all right.